Good morning.
Hi, how are you?
Good, good, Barcham. How are you?
I am great. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Oh man, thank you for accepting it. It's amazing. It's okay. I saw. So you mentioned you grew up in Baltimore, and I'm curious who some of your childhood rabbanim were, and who were the rabbis in the shuls that you remember growing up.
So I grew up primarily around the corner from Shomrei Emunah in Baltimore, right off of Green Spring Avenue, for those are listening that are Baltimoreans. And primarily our rabbi growing up was Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Weinreb, who eventually, left our shul for his position as the executive vice president at the OU. Rabbi Weinreb was the Rav there, I would say, from when I was, a little kid, I don't know, 6 or 7, whenever we moved to that side of town, maybe 8 years old, until basically I left for yeshiva. I don't remember the exact years, but I think he left when I was 16, 17, right around when I was a senior in high school. Um, there were definitely formidable years and memories and experiences that we had with Rabbi Weinreb as our Rav. And I would say that it was very impactful because he had such great respect in our home. My parents spoke about him with reverence and appreciation. I distinctly remember my father kind of identifying when we talked about him, about his scholarship and his grasp of the English language. My father was always impressed by Rabbi Weinreb's quoting of the Hakdama of Svarim that he quoted. Rabbi Weiner would say, quote, we were learning a sefer, and he would say, in the Hakdama he writes X, Y, and Z, and my father just felt like as an audience member, um, that Rabbi Weinreb, knew who he was talking about and read the sefer thoroughly, and had so many interesting anecdotes to say. It was very impressionable on our whole family. So I wouldn't say we had the closest relationship in the world with him at the time, even though I remain a little bit in touch with him every so often. It's been many, many years. But he left a Roshem in that sense of a real a stellar rabbinic personality. Distinctly remember his, especially my older brother's bar mitzvah, the first bar mitzvah in the whole family. Rabbi Weinreb addressing the family on Tazria Mitzorah with all of our non-religious relatives there, and just everybody kind of being dazzled by him. It was very memorable and meaningful. Um, and again, just a positive influence, just a strong force, a person who davens with tremendous kavana and speaks about Yiddishkeit with tremendous enthusiasm and richness, and was very powerful in terms of the Shoah, in terms of Kinos on Tisha B'Av, in terms of when he was our Rav. I think for many years we did the last Hakafa on Simchas Torah was dedicated to all the children that were lost in the Shoah, and he would sing Ani Maamin and go slowly around for that hakafa. That those kinds of impressionable memories that I had of this was someone who was of a really high caliber. And it was a mixed emotions when he left. I think everyone was happy. I was still, I was only 16, 17, but my sense was that he was people were happy for him, but also sad he was leaving. It
Yeah.
also was interesting because as a 16, 17-year-old, my shul went through an elongated search process for a rabbi. Little did I know that that would be relevant in my own life. I actually learned a lot. I have shared stories in my own shul about memories of prabhas that I went to as a 17-year-old kid. I was very active in shul. My parents encouraged us to be active. We felt as teenagers in our shul that we belonged there, that people cared about our opinion, which is probably not true, but was interesting to think about. And then our shul ultimately selected Rabbi Dovid Gottlieb to serve as the Rav, which he did for a number of years until he made Aliyah. And now Binyamin Marwick serves as the rabbi there, who has been outstanding, not only to my family, but to the community. But that's after once I've been in the Rabbanis, I haven't been home very much. So Rabbi Weinreb was my childhood rabbi, and then during those formative years where I was actually thinking about going into the Rabbanas, my years in Keren B'Yavneh, my years at Yeshiva University, my years in Smicha, etc., Rabbi Gottlieb was my parents' Rav, and he had gone through that uh, process himself. He was a young person. He was running a big shul. He had Yeshiva University Smicha. He was a professional, and not only was he a good sounding board for me, I did reach out to him a number of times for advice along the way. And even though I was never really home because I was in Karen Biavna when he was started out, and then I was home for the summer, and I'd go to his shiurim, and then I was back in yeshiva and back and forth, and then he made aliyah. But even during those years, I always felt he was our Rav, and we were connected to him, and he was curious how I was doing in yeshiva. And I think for my family, he also kind of made the Rabbanus reachable, that if one of my parents' children wanted to go into the Rabbanus where Rabbi Gottlieb's doing it, he could do it, and he's successful, and it's a real career, and it has a salary, and et cetera, and all of those things. I think my parents saw him as a reachable professional. Maybe Rabbi Weinreb was a little bit unreachable for us in a certain sense because of that reverence. The combination of the two were very formative, and extremely, extremely positive, and I consider that to be a big bracha in my life.
Yeah. So what I'm curious, what maybe identifiable takeaways you have from Rabbi Weinreb and or Rabbi Gottlieb that you can pinpoint and say, I got that from them, or I used that, or that's something that I learned from them.
So I would say that with Rabbi Weinreb, because I was so young, it was more aspirational than anything else. Meaning, I remember him being calm and articulate and having tremendous presence. I can't say, I took the presence that I have on my pulpit from Rabbi Dr. Tzvi Weinreb. I don't think that that makes sense. But as a goal for what it looks like to be a Rav in the eyes of others, to have a strong presence, I think he carried himself with a certain calmness and a certain ruchnius. And those are things that are not necessarily in my nature, but I understand are really important to the Rabbanas. People should see that even though their Rav is very busy with thinking about his drasha in his head and making sure details are working correctly during davening. I think we're all more integrated with logistics than we want to be during davening and things like that. But davening is important to your Rav. I remember him; he was a real davener. I think Rabbi Weiner wore a gartel, wears a gartel, so it was also like, not that I'm a Hasidic person in that way, but I just felt like there was like he had a dalafnei miata omed kind of orientation towards the davened with patience and with kavana. He spoke about tefillah. He spoke about Hasidic Rebbes and their tefillah, and he left that impression. There's a high, like, rich spirituality to him that came along with his professionalism and his expertise in psychology and his wisdom and all of that. So it's very, very aspirational. In Rabbi Gottlieb's case, he is a very dynamic sheer giver, and I think people could learn from him and with him. Um, with ease, regardless of their background. And the community in Baltimore, yeah, nothing's as diverse as people say it is, but it's a pretty diverse community. And it skews kind of from center right to right, if you will, meaning it's a modern Orthodox shul, but has a lot of yeshiva guys and people that learned in serious yeshivas and have like very serious backgrounds in lumdus and people that are learning on a regular basis. And I think the bar is very high in terms of the kind of shear that people expect. And he was someone who took his drushos very seriously. He was trained in the YU system. I don't remember exactly, but he was definitely somebody who wrote and read his drushos and took them, and they were very professional in that way. But at the same time, you go to Mishmar, and he was given shir at a big time high level, and it was lumdish and it was geschmack, and I think people really appreciated it from all circles. They say the Rav should be able to do both of those. And I always saw it as doable because I think people respected him for both. At least that was my perception from years ago. And I definitely thought it resonates with people, like the warmth of Torah and that engaging sheer dynamic is a different skill set than a drasha, and he was great at both of them.
Yeah. So tell me about your smicha journey and some of the things that you picked up over there. And I know they do public speaking and homiletics and what you glean from those years.
Yeah, in retrospect, the smicha experience was outstanding, and a lot of things that I didn't think I would need in life turned out to be skills that I needed and remember and appreciate, and were very formative. Um, I learned in Karen Biavne for 2 years, and I did college at YU. I was learning in a Rosenzweig Shir, and it was a big schus to learn with him. And I felt, number one, that I was growing in Torah. Number two, that there was a place for me in Avodas HaKodesh. And if I had the skills to do it, I should do it. So it felt very organic and natural. And then as I transitioned into smicha, I was a balkore in college. I used to lane in the YU base medrash. And then I got a phone call from Rabbi Gideon Shlush, who was at the time the rabbi of Adareth El in Murray Hill. He has since made Aliyah. He was looking for a balkore. So I started to go to Murray Hill for Shabbos, just to lane and make a few bucks to get me through college. And once I
Where
was there,
where were you living at the time? You were in the
I was in
dorm.
the dorm at YU. I was a college student still,
The how,
but I was my family was in. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm curious. How did you get all the way down to Murray Hill? You'd stay there for Shabbos, or you would walk, or
Yeah, yeah. So I would stay for Shabbos. The community was lovely. It still is a lovely place. Very intimate, old school, small kind of city shul, but very historic. 175 years old or whatever it is. And the mainstays of that shul, the interesting families that lived and raised their kids in Murray Hill, which are very few, just embraced me and loved me and cared about me very much. And that was a great break from campus. It was like I went to this community and I had regular places to stay and regular places to eat, and opportunity to lane and make some money. And people were very kind to me. And Rabbi Shlush was actually, in addition to his role at the shul, was also the rabbinic intern placement office at YU. So once I was there for a decent amount of time, 6 months, 8 months, whatever it was, he asked me to stay on for another year. I had enrolled in Smicha already and offered me the opportunity to be his intern. It was a zenene of a zenene situation because it was an easy path to an internship, and it meant he would have regular balkore in his shul. And the teaching opportunities were relatively small, informal, but they were totally up to. Yeah, I had opportunity to give drushos in the shul, and I spoke with Shalosh Shudis every time I was there, and to give a shir Shabbos afternoon before mincha. So it was a small, modest crowd, but a great learning experience. Some of those experiences just need to be safe learning experiences without so much high risk and pressure. And before I knew it, I was kind of knee deep in smicha, and I had been there for a couple of years, which more than the average internship, and I was really integrated in people's lives. And I was experimenting with sharing all different kinds of Torah with them that I was learning in smicha. I learned a lot from Rabbi Shlush. I'm very grateful to him for the many years of experience that I ended up having in congregation at Dareth El. Not to mention, Rabbi Sidney Kleinman, Zichrona Livracha, was the rabbi emeritus. He has since passed away. Rabbi Kleinman uh, um, remained at the shul till the end of his life, and he was well over 100. I don't remember when he passed away, if he was 103 or something like that. And when I was in the shul, I ended up being there for about 4 years. Rabbi Kleinman was maybe 96 to 99, the years that I was there. It was a very interesting experience to meet somebody like that. He'd been in the shul forever. He started there, and I don't remember the exact years off the top of my head, but he used to tell this story about kind of when he came to his first interview with the shul. He ended up being late because there were some guys playing stickball in the street in Murray Hill, and they asked him if he wanted to play. So he got distracted playing stickball in the street. It was like from a totally different world. And when he was 96, he gave a drush on his birthday. And I remember him saying, Ein Tzav Ela Lashon Zrizas. And Tzav is Gematria 96. And he gave that drasha, he couldn't even see anymore, let alone read Svarim. And somehow he had that in his head. And that's the drush. It was unbelievable. People were machabed him in a special way. So it was a wonderful experience. To kind of have exposure to an old world rabbi like him, mentorship and friendship from Rabbi Shlush and from his wife Bonnie. They were very kind to me. I ended up meeting my wife, who was in Stern College during my time in Murray Hill, and we kind of started out in the Rabbanos together almost because we were dating and married our first 6 months. We lived in Murray Hill, so I could complete my internship there. And that was a wonderful foray into what was to come. We still maintain relationships with people from that shul so many years later. I'm very grateful to them for the experience and all the blessings that came from having been a part of that community. So
yeah,
that was a one piece of my smicha story, because my weekends were very involved there, and just great experiences throughout. Rabbi Penner was running the Friday SR program at Yeshiva during my day. and teaching us about tefillah and drasha workshops and things of that nature. We learned with Dr. Pelkovitz about pastoral counseling. Dr. Blumenthal wasn't so involved yet, but I remember meeting him at the time. Um, and a couple of other very memorable training experiences that have all absolutely played out in real life for me. And homiletics with Rabbi Lookstein was very memorable. In that year, Rabbi Lookstein had something going on. I don't remember exactly what it was, but he ended up not being available a lot of Fridays because of his responsibilities at KJ. And we had a lot of guest speakers, and those were very memorable. I remember Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik sitting in, and Rabbi Adam Mintz sitting in, and I learned a lot from all of them and all those experiences. Just they came to fruition time and time again. So it was a great scaffolding process to becoming a Rav. I'm very grateful for those experiences.
Yeah. And then that took you to Shari Shamayim in Toronto?
Correct. So my wife and I got married, and we're looking for a plan for the next couple of years. I had 1 year left of smicha and trying to figure out where we wanted to be. And my wife was finishing up at Stern College, and the Yeshiva University Torah Mitzion Kollel was advertising that they were looking for Avreichim to join when it was under the stewardship of Rabbi Torchiner, who recently returned to the U.S. To West Hempstead, and the opportunity just sounded great. So we jumped on it. We were 6 months married at the time, and we moved up to Toronto, and we joined the Kollel full time. And they created at that time an internship opportunity for each of us, depending on where in Toronto we wanted to live. It was tremendous mazel for us that we looked around the neighborhoods and wanted to find a nice apartment, and we weren't afraid of living in a little bit of a different neighborhood than where the Kollel was. And we ended up kind of driving around and meeting the different shuls. And Rabbi Strachler, Chaim Strachler, was the Rav in Shar Shamayim at the time. And we met him. He invited us on Shabbos to walk down and to give a shir before Mincha. And we just had this feeling like it was a good fit for us, a place where we could contribute. So we ended up choosing to live in the Bathurst and Lawrence area, right around the corner from Shar Shamayim. And in addition to the Kollel years, where Rabbi Torchiner and Rav Baruch Weintraub from the Gush was there. We had amazing learning experiences, but I also had a tremendous internship experience with Rabbi Strachler, who was, and his wife were incredible to us and trained us in a lot of very subtle ways that were very helpful for my career. And also Rabbi Elliot Diamond, who is still in Shar Shamayim to this day, both outstanding mentors and teachers and speakers. And we learned a lot from them for the 2 years we dive in there.
Yeah. Amazing. So tell me some of the takeaways from that period of some of the people that you learned under, like Rabbi Strachler.
Well, I don't know if either of them will end up listening to this podcast, but if they do, I say this with respect to them both. They are very different speakers. And was Rabbi Diamond, because of his part-time role in the shul and his work at the Nitivot school. So he's more of a part-time person of a smaller minyan. And then the rabbi of the shul is running the main minyan in the main sanctuary. Rabbi Strachler, very formal, very prepared, very methodical, very sometimes cerebral in the way that he thinks about topics. And Rabbi Diamond, much simpler, much more soulful, just a different energy, a different vibe. And I always find as Rabbanim, we're always vacillating between those two extremes. We want to say things that are perfectly articulated, and we want to deliver drushos that are formally packaged and things like that. And sometimes the ideas conveyed on paper in those drushos are incredibly powerful because the Rav has really invested time in crystallizing an idea. But they don't always come off in presentation as having the same spirit that the less formal drushos have. So I was literally upstairs and downstairs listening to both of them, and incredibly inspired and challenged by them both. But the most amazing part was to be able to hear both of them at the same time, meaning on a regular basis. So I learned a lot from them both. I will also say that I didn't speak too often on Shabbos mornings in that shul. And the experience of being in the crowd, which Rabbanim lose. Once you're the Rav, you're not in the crowd anymore. Being in the crowd and listening to people's reactions to them was a very meaningful long-term experience. Just hearing the way people responded. I remember drushos where people said they didn't like it. I remember drushos where people were upset by things that one of them may have said or didn't say, or a topic they took a certain perspective on, and how much people love them. There's a reason that people davened upstairs when they could daven downstairs and vice versa. People gravitated towards the minyan and the experience and the kind of Torah that resonated with them. And I was able to watch all of those people digest all of the ideas and the skills and the messages and the spirit of those two speakers. And it taught me a lot about feedback and understanding how well received you are and how to reach different kinds of people. So it's a very wonderful experience on both, literally in both rooms on both floors of the building.
So would you say that you're kind of a synthesis of those two modes?
No, but I would say that I aspire to be. I'm not sure where I fall out. Probably depends on the day. But I see the value in both, and I can tell the difference. I'm self-aware that sometimes the drasha lends itself to being formal. The timing is appropriate. The content feels like it's the kind of drasha that should be well structured and well written and well properly delivered. And sometimes you just want to tell people an amazing story and give them an amazing Rashi and tell them why you saw it and you couldn't help but share it with them. It's good to be aware that both of those skills exist and both of those skills are valuable, and you should allow the drasha to determine which kind of sermon you're giving.
Uh-huh. So I saw also that you were assistant rabbi and associate rabbi at the Jewish Center, and that has a kind of reputation precedes itself as a certain type of a sermon, more formal, read from notes. I understand that there's an emphasis on that, and I'm curious how uh, coming from Shari Shemayim and then over there, was it a divergence in style that you had to match, or did you see it as kind of a step up in your sermon style speaking?
So it was the expectation. You're exactly right in what its reputation is, and that's exactly what it is. The style is very structured and formal. The expectation is that the rabbis will conform themselves to the style of the shul. Certainly, as assistants and interns and associates, like this is how we do it. And that 12-minute perfectly written sermon beginning to end is kind of the gold standard. If you will, it's the ghost of Rabbi Lamb, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh Livracha, who set this incredible standard. You read Rabbi Lamb's drashos and you can tell this is someone who understood the value of every word that they used. I will tell you, a former executive director and shamish of the shul would tell me this, describe Rabbi Lamb's process. He was an incredibly busy person, certainly in the later years of his time at the Jewish Center when he was soon to become president of YU. He was already a national figure, and he lived an incredibly busy life and was an incredibly dedicated scholar. It was Yadua that Rabbi Lamb started writing his drashos on Saturday night. That's Yadua. And that being said, Rabbi Lamb's drashos, there were no computers. So he had a secretary that was typing for him. So Rabbi Lamb would come into the office for 20 minutes between meetings, and he would come in with a hard copy of a drasha and scratch off two words because he wanted to reformulate a sentence and rewrite it by hand and give it to his secretary, and she had to retype the entire thing beginning to end. And from the collections online, even the final drafts have scratches on them and words changed. He did create this incredible gold standard. And he was a master at that. His mastery of language and his creativity and his wisdom were all present on the page. So yes, that's a very high standard. It's also not everybody's skill set, which I think is okay to say. But in that position, there was an expectation that this is what we're going for. There were times where I felt I understood the value of it and I produced something that I was really proud of, and I'd worked so hard at it that it all felt worth it to try and be that person or to fit that mold. And then there were times in hindsight where I think, this drasha, like I said earlier about my other experiences, didn't need to be that nor do I think everybody in the audience necessarily needed it. So it might have been a little too constraining, but I totally respect and appreciate that style very much. And I know that it's doable. People say, well, you can't read off a piece of paper and have it be meaningful. Or I hear my rabbinic interns say this all the time. This isn't the kind of idea that I could write on paper. That's not true. Every idea can be written perfectly. You know from your own life experiences, and it's true. You ask somebody in Hollywood about how do they write scripts for really emotional scenes. It's a challenging skill set, but you could do it. So I do believe that every great idea and feeling you have can come out on paper, and you can maximize your time, and you can accomplish so much more. Because when you really crystallize everything and you synthesize it, you can pack in a tremendous amount into 12 minutes on paper. Again, it's a specific style, but it can work. So I worked very hard to follow the instructions that I was given and the mentorship from Rabbi Levine, who continues that tradition in a very ritualistic and purposeful way. Um, and uh, and I tried my best to do it as I could. I wouldn't say that I continue to abide by those principles. In Riverdale, I think the structure is a little bit softer, and I lean into that. But it was very also a tremendously meaningful learning experience, and I learned a lot about how to convey my ideas as clearly and precisely and succinctly as possible. And those are very important skills to have.
Yeah. Someone was telling me, I think it was Rabbi Hain, Shmuel Hain, was telling me about the architecture of the bima there is it's much more elevated. And so when you're darshaning or preaching or whatever you want to call it, there's this kind of status, where there's this I and you versus maybe let's say a we, more conversational, more collective experience for the Gila. Did you
That's an
find that?
interesting memory. I don't know if I necessarily felt it. I think it's a very effective space. A lot of times, the architecture of the rooms are just not conducive. The best example of this is you have people who sit behind the bima when the bima is in the middle of a shul, and you can't even see them. So, and they certainly can't see you, or they're uncomfortable. That's really tough. The piece that, specifically because I've moved from the Jewish Center to the Riverdale Jewish Center, the major difference for me is not the height, or that gap, even though I know what he's referring to, but the Riverdale Jewish Center is a very wide room. It's almost like a semicircle. And if the Rav wants to speak to the people that are to his far right, he has to turn his back to the people that are to his far left. And even though the Jewish Center is a very large sanctuary, it's very narrow. And the people, especially in the women's sections, because the women are a little more elevated than the men, the women feel very close to you, to the right, and you don't have to look very far from the pulpit. And here it's a constant struggle, and we're guiding our scholars and residents. Please don't look all the way to the right. Please don't look all the way to the left. People won't be able to hear you. And it's a lot more effort to make eye contact with people and have them feel connected. So my experience at the Jewish Center on my best days was I did feel like I was able to see everybody and I was able to connect with everybody from the pulpit. It didn't feel too far removed. Shari Shamayim in Toronto, incredibly high up, much higher than the Jewish Center, 12 steps up to the Aron Kodesh, and the rabbi's way up there. And it's a big impediment on connecting to people. The space matters a lot.
Yeah. So you came in 2019 to RJC, and what was how did you establish yourself? I understand there was a lengthy search process, and after kind of like a very public, the shul went through a public experience with their last rabbi. So how did you establish yourself, and how did you avail yourself of the platform of the drasha to deal with certain issues?
So that's a very good question. I think the relationship between, inserting yourself in a community effectively and your drasha, for the purposes of this conversation, is a really interesting question. Um, I think it's a combination. Number one, your drasha is not a replacement for building relationships with people. You can't just be funny from the pulpit and people think you're a warm person. You have to integrate. I would say that I integrated with some people well, and with other people's not so well, and with some people very quickly, and some people very slowly. I had my good moments and my bad moments. I wouldn't describe it as the perfect transition, nor do I think it was seamless in any way. And I also felt but from a drasha standpoint or from the pulpit, I think there were a couple of things. Number one is I wanted to convey as much professionalism as possible. I tried to come into Shabbos 100% prepared. We started putting drasha titles in the bulletin on Thursday, so people should know that the rabbi is actively thinking about what's important to say, and if there's something important that the rabbi wants to talk about, you should know in advance to clear your schedule, so to speak, to be available. Now, of course, that's not always the case. Sometimes the drasha is just, why did the Ramban love this parsha so much? And that's the title. Sometimes you put in a title and then you change your mind on Thursday afternoon. That's also okay. But it was a sentiment that said, this is a serious institution and this is a serious community. And there's a rabbi here who values you as an audience and is putting in hard work to prepare for you. And I know that even though my drushos weren't necessarily perfect or perfect for the audience at the beginning, I think people understood that I took the responsibility very seriously, and that feedback was clear. And they respected it, even when they said, that was great, but you should do something different, which I did get some of that feedback. I think knowing that I was working hard was meaningful to them in ways maybe that they didn't even expect, and I thought it was effective in that regard. A little bit, I think people get to know you, especially when they don't know you yet. People really do get to know you through your drushos, which changes over time because the more they know you outside of shul, the less your drasha tells them about you. But I think people did get to meet me through my drushos. I tell a lot of personal stories. I feel very comfortable sharing anecdotes from my own life. Those are the spaces in drushos where I don't feel like I need to write because I know I can tell those stories effectively. I am a little bit self-deprecating, maybe at times a little too much. People have said that to me, but I feel like there's a vulnerability in it and there's a humility in it. And people love to connect with you over silly things that about your own experience, which are shared or different. And I try to do as much of that as possible. I would also say that our shul had gone through a lot of complicated things before I got here. And while I wasn't addressing them directly, as more complicated things came up, I felt it was really my job to address them from the pulpit. There was a crime committed at one of the local day schools only a few months after I moved here. And one of the assistant principals had gotten arrested. We don't have to get into the details of it now, but it was a moment. I'd only been here for 2.5 months, but it was clear that I had to talk about it on Shabbos morning. The title had to be in the bulletin that I was going to be talking about it, and I had to get it right. And that was one of those times where I called people for advice. I tried to feel people out in the community for what they thought was going on. I spoke to the leadership at the school and the leadership of the shul, and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote because I knew I needed to say certain things, and I felt like they needed to know that in crisis I would be willing to lead them even early on. I wouldn't say it was the greatest drasha I gave. I don't think the specifics of it are necessarily important or memorable, but I think in that moment it said, when something happens in this community, I'm going to address it effectively from the pulpit. I would also just add that I started in the summer of 2019, and then in March of 2020, which was only 7 months later, that's when COVID hit. So as much as the transition was complicated, as much as it had moments of success and moments of failure, everything started again when the shul closed, and that
Yeah.
was both a bracha and a klala at the same time.
So, in terms of just going backwards a moment, in terms of addressing some of the past, the history of the shul before he got there, did you address anything head on, or did you say we have an eye to the future and
No, I took the eye to the future uh, perspective. Number one, I learned through this process that you can't reconstruct for people who lived through it what it was like for them. I wasn't here, so I'm not qualified to weigh in on anything that happened or decisions that were made. I think there were some lessons learned from a shul going through crisis that needed to remain on people's minds. And by that I mean, for example, our shul has to put a priority on achdus. You have to say that the responsibility of the community to stick together even when they disagree about something is a priority for a shul that's already fractured. So I've talked about that on a number of occasions of just prioritizing our commitment to each other, knowing that everybody in the room knows what that means. Even though I wasn't here before and I don't know what they went through, and I understand there's a lot of pain and hurt feelings and unresolved issues and things of that nature, but we can all agree. Anybody Asher Yeshno Po Imanu Hayom, we're going to stick together. We're going to talk to each other in a positive way, and we're going to resolve stuff together. That has been effective for the most part, and largely speaking, through COVID and war in Israel and machlokas about little things here and there, we've usually kept a very positive tone, and that I think is a positive byproduct of having gone through a very difficult chapter. But about the past itself, we have some policies so that we don't make the same mistakes that were made in the past, but I don't address it and certainly don't speak about it from the pulpit on a regular basis.
Yeah. So I also read that unfortunately the shul has been the target of some vandalism and some bomb threats and things like that. So how do you address those? How do you, as the rabbi, try to keep people's fear in check, anger in check, and lead through using the drasha again as a vehicle, that speaking slot?
Right. So the well recorded events of the bomb threat that took place a number of years ago was before my time. That's kind of a post 9/11 FBI investigation that led to a fake attempt to cause harm to a synagogue that the police were monitoring. A very complicated story. You could read about it in the news. It's before my time. People remember it in this community because, it happened to us as an institution, but it's not on the forefront of people's minds anymore. What
Mm-hmm.
we did experience maybe 3 years ago was, and again, this is kind of on the back end of COVID, I think. There was a person who had family in the neighborhood, a non-Jewish individual with a mental health issue. We didn't know this at the time, of course, who was going through the neighborhood, primarily targeting us, but had gone to other shuls as well, and was just throwing rocks through the windows or at the windows um, late in the night or the middle of the night. So, one morning we woke up to the news that there were windows smashed at the shul. There was a little bit of a panic. I think it was maybe the middle of the night on a Saturday night. I don't remember the exact dates anymore. Um, and we couldn't figure it out. We have a charter school that rents space from us in the building. So one of our thoughts was general vandalism. The other thought was maybe it's related to school. The details don't necessarily matter. But what ended up happening, what does matter to understand the story, is that this person committed these acts of violence over multiple nights, time and again, primarily in our shul and Chabad and the conservative synagogue, one time at the Young Israel, Rabbi Willig shul. We joked that he was like doing hakafos around the neighborhood. And the police came, they were super responsive. The 50th precinct here in the Bronx is incredible. We work very closely with them. They were here. We have professional security. We have a CSS volunteer team. We have a great system in place. Some of that's the result of the bomb threat from years before, but we have a very, I think, thank God, a very secure shul and a very professional system. But the police committed to stay full-time 24 hours a day at the building until they caught the person. And then there were police in front of our shul one night, and he came and threw rocks at the back window. They didn't even hear him. So that's when it kind of escalated. Now, the mayor was calling and the governor's office was calling. They were all embarrassed because they had put police outside of shul, and we have the video surveillance of all around our building. We saw him come up the other side, and the cops were in the front of the building, not paying attention to the side of the building. He was 40 feet away from them. They didn't even hear him. He just got away. So it escalated until eventually one night he had thrown some rocks at the conservative synagogue and rode off on a bike. And then the cops were in the neighborhood and they chased him down on the bike and they arrested him. And since then, it's been, even though he was, caught and released, as is the policy in New York, um, he didn't recommit. So since then, it hadn't been an issue. So I would say from a leadership standpoint, that's the context for those who are listening of
Yeah.
the story. And then from leadership standpoint, these are, I would say, my two ha'aros on the subject. Number one is my feeling was broken windows at a shul is very traumatizing for people. It's especially traumatizing for Holocaust survivors. or or maybe children of Holocaust survivors. Just the idea, like that Kristallnacht image,
Yeah.
is very traumatic. So number one, we had our executive director and our window company replace the windows as quickly as possible. And to be honest, even though we knew he might reoffend, because it became clear like they hadn't caught him and he was probably going to come back by the second or third time, I just felt like we can't have broken windows. So a couple of the windows we replaced twice. We didn't board them up. We didn't like put up tape, and we cleaned up very quickly. And I thought that was like the most important thing we could do. We could, people want to know because they don't come to shul until the next Shabbos. The Daily Minyan people will see it. You could tell them what happened, but I didn't see any value in waiting for a donor to pay for it or waiting for government funding to come through. The most important thing is to replace the windows right now. And we did that, I think, multiple times, unfortunately, until it was resolved. And that's an example of silent leadership. It's not about what you say from the pulpit, it's the opposite. I just don't feel like it's necessary to traumatize our members in that way. Let's just get it done. And that was number one. Number two, the person was living at the time or had been visiting with his mother, who lived in an apartment in the neighborhood in the same building as a lot of our members. And that was our responsibility was to communicate with them as frequently as possible once we figured out who it was. Once the police arrested him and told us about him, did the members feel safe? Did we, we reached out to the to the board of the condo to talk to them about what their policy was going to be. He's still allowed to live there. He's allowed to visit his mom and sleep over, even though he was released on bail. So we checked in with the members, we checked in with the building, we checked in with the NYPD. We made sure our protocols were up to par, and it was a lot of work. It was a tremendous amount of work and a tremendous volume of communication. NYPD called, I think at the time, it was during the mayoral campaign in which Eric Adams became the mayor. Every candidate running for mayor called my cell phone to make sure I was okay and pledge their support and make sure some funny stories from that time. Rabbi Berman reached out to me from YU to see if yeshiva could support us through the process. Because for those couple of like that 10 days or 2 weeks that it just kind of kept happening, it was very scary until we knew what was going on. And in hindsight, which is part of the reason why we have to keep people calm and feeling safe, it ultimately boils down, unfortunately, to one mentally ill person who rode around the neighborhood and threw rocks. So it's not an indictment on the community. It's not an indictment of rising anti-Semitism, in my opinion. I don't think it's a reflection on the values of the police department, even though you could make the case, as some of our local officials did during that, the catch and release policy or the bail reform policies cause this to happen to everybody all the time. So maybe we should join that bandwagon and object to bail reform for hate crimes and things of that nature. So I had those conversations with people, but I felt like primarily it was our job to keep the peace and not overreact, and give our people a sense of safety. I don't think people need to come to shul on Shabbos and talk about broken windows.
Yeah.
We're dealing with it. We're dealing with it. We were transparent, or we sent emails to our membership on a regular basis, but I don't remember it being something that was frontal from the pulpit. The real work happened kind of behind the scenes.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So tell me, we have about 10 minutes left. Tell me a little bit about your process. It's Wednesday now, and where are you holding in the drasha, and what you do till you get to prime time on Shabbos morning.
So there are weeks that everyone would say the same thing, where there's an issue you have to talk about, and the question is what Torah perspective will inform that topic as best as possible. So you start with your topic and then work your way towards the parsha. There are weeks where there isn't really anything going on. So those are what I like to call the Torah Lishma drashos, where you just start with is a beautiful parsha and you learn it, you open your svarim and you see what they say and you try and tackle it that way. And you try and make it relevant. They don't necessarily feel so different in the final product to your members, but certainly in terms of process, you begin and end in different places. I think now we're in a funny time, doing this interview after multiple months of war in Eretz Yisrael, where it feels like everything related to the war and whatever the future process is and the existential threat that Israel faces is constant. And the real question every week is, am I talking about Israel or am I going to take a break? And if I'm taking a break, how much of a break am I taking? So I'm definitely struggling with that right now. We never could not have anticipated that we'd be doing it from Simchas Torah to Purim, but kacha we are. Um, and I have, moments where you're just talking about Eretz Yisrael because it matters or something I saw in the paper, etc. I try to respond to things that are going on in real life that I think my members are actively thinking about. I don't usually bring random surveys and random studies and things like that. I try and anticipate what are my members reading in the newspaper this week? What movies are they watching? What sporting events are they attending? What concerts are they going to? And then to talk about it, to really offer them a religious perspective on what they're experiencing during the week. That's my dream scenario. Um, and I find very often that people really need it. They spend the whole week reading about, watching, thinking about something. And then when they come to shul, I try and offer them my perspective on what I think it means to me or what it should mean to them. So I could give you an example. Like I remember politics is a great example because politics have been so hot the last couple of years. I remember during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings for the Supreme Court, the issue was so nasty and it was on everybody's minds and the cover of every paper and the first conversation on every news channel. And it needed to be processed from a religious standpoint. It wasn't a question of whether or not I thought a right-wing justice to be on the Supreme Court or a left-wing justice to be on the. What does it mean for us as religious Jews that this is the kind of conversation that's being had? Especially when it's around, we were living through the Me Too movement and sexual violence and promiscuity and all of those questions. Modern Orthodox Jews need to be thinking about these subjects, how we talk about them, and the impact that they have on us and our values. So I wasn't talking about whether or not I thought Brett Kavanaugh was innocent or guilty, whether or not I thought he was qualified to be a Supreme Court justice, but what does it feel like to be a frum Jew living through this? How does it make us better people to learn, be more self-aware of what we're going through? Is Kal V'chomer ben Benoshel Kal V'chomer. With the Trump presidency and now another election cycle coming about, we have to think about that. What does it mean to be a Jew living through this? So people always say, oh, isn't it so hard to talk about politics? I'm not talking politics. I'm talking about the experience of Jews living through politics, which I don't think are the same thing at all. So sometimes, that's the case. And I have my svarim and I have my process. I fully believe, shifting gears for a second to answer the question under normal circumstances more directly, I believe that the Torah itself, the Chumash itself, is packed with really powerful human messages and human experiences. And you don't have to go very far from the Parshanut to really convey that they're important topics we should be talking about. And I don't follow this rule all the time, but I will tell you my instinct is to teach as close to the pshat as possible. And I look at the parsha and I ask myself, what's the pshat that way an adult should read this parsha differently or more maturely or more richly than they learned it as a kid? What does it say to me this week? And I try and teach it in a relatable way that's as close to the text as possible. So it's understandable and relevant and repeatable. And I find every story, every parsha, every halacha in the Chumash has something to say about it. Stick to the pshat, stick to the halacha, stick to the basic narrative, and the messages I usually speak for themselves.
Mm-hmm. What ways would you say that you've evolved in your speaking style since you began? Maybe some of the areas that you feel like you've broken through, and some of the areas that you still struggle with.
Um, I think I think I've probably gotten better at teaching or presenting tensions and questions in my drasha more clearly, so people understand, like, what is he talking about? What is the issue here? Why is there a problem? And I think finding the tension at the beginning of your drasha so that people can understand, there's this perspective and that perspective. There's a contradiction here. There's a question that needs to be answered. I think I can be pretty effective in getting from a story and a joke and an article and whatever else is at the introduction of a drasha to really hammering home this is the question I'm thinking about. This is the question that we have to answer before this drasha is over. But then where I struggle is kind of on the back end. If I don't have my drasha perfectly written out, I sometimes have a hard time ending as concisely as I would like to. And I do find like so I have these drashas where the first 8 minutes are exactly the way I want them to be, and then the last 8 minutes or 9 minutes are not where I want them to be, and I'm frustrated that it shouldn't have taken me 17 minutes to get here, and I didn't land the way that I wanted to. It's a product of honestly how much effort you put in, and I think it shows sometimes that I did half the effort, not the other half. That's always frustrating.
Yeah. What are some of your pet peeves when you hear a drasha that drive you crazy?
Can I? My wife's favorite pet peeve that I don't think she'd mind me repeating is she hates when rabbis quote themselves. As I said 3 months ago on she's if you quote yourself, I'm walking out of the room. So I never quote myself because my wife doesn't let me. And I think it's true. That's like a pet, pet peeve. In certain speaking forums, if you're speaking about the same things as other people, everybody always says, as was said earlier, as was said earlier. We know it was said earlier because we all heard it. So stop doing that, you know? I think sometimes people translate and give more commentary on things than they need to. You don't need to tell everybody who Rashi was all the time. We know. Um, you kind of have to respect your audience, and I think people don't necessarily do. In terms of that. Um, and I think sometimes people we have thoughts in our head as we're saying things, and we share those thoughts out loud when they're just not necessary. That's also like a lack of professionalism. Again, especially if you're ad-libbing because you don't have everything fully written out. Just don't say it. If it doesn't contribute, just don't say it. Um, and try to be as tight and to the point as possible.
Yeah. So I have two last questions. One of which is if you have two pieces of advice, two short pieces of advice that you would give to an emerging rabbi, um, who's embarking on his speaking career from the pulpit, what would those two primary pieces of advice be?
Oh, number one, my experience with the rabbinic internship program, which I love and I appreciate doing, and I was a beneficiary of, is very often, not always, but very often, the experience of our musmachim is very insular. You grew up in a frum community and you went to a Jewish day school and you spent time in Eretz Yisrael and your college experience was at YU and you like learning morning Seder and night Seder and you have no exposure to what's going on in the world. So number one, you don't really get the values or the life experiences of the people in your audience. I always tell my interns, your audience did not go to smicha, you did. You have to know who they are, and you have to find a way to connect to what's going on around you. So you have to read and you have to listen and you have to watch to what everyone else is doing. Find a magazine or a book or something that can give you a sense of what's going on in the culture. For a number of years, and this was my own experience. I had no idea what was going on in the world and what people were thinking about and what they were reading. And I had a subscription to the Atlantic magazine years ago, like in my earlier assistant rabbi days, before the Trump era where everything became about politics all the time. And you just read the magazine to see like what people are researching and what they're talking about. And we lived through all these experiences like Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement and extreme right-wing politics and left-wing anti-Semitism and all these things and culture. What are people writing about? What are people reading? What kind of movies are coming out? What's going on in the sports world? What's going on in the professional world? Like what's going on in the business world and in medicine and things like that. And if you have no idea what's going on, you can't relate to people about what all you're doing is, Kulo Torah, which is amazing, but it's not relevant for your audience necessarily. So the first piece of advice is get as much exposure to the world around you in as the safest way possible as you possibly can. Find something or things to read and watch and learn to really tap in to the cultural experience of what it is to be a congregant, what it is to be maybe an American, for this audience, um, and try and do that as often as possible so you can really relate to people effectively. I think that's probably my first and most important piece of advice to the young rabbis coming out. The second piece of advice is learn to get really excellent feedback, true feedback, everywhere you possibly can. When you're an intern and an assistant, I was zoche to be an intern and an associate and an assistant for many years. So I got plenty of feedback from my senior rabbinic mentors. Lots of our rabbanim become rabbis of small shuls in their late 20s, and then they go from there to other shuls, and they never have real mentorship, real honest feedback ever again. So you have to get it from your congregants, or you have to ask for a mentor. We give hundreds of speeches a year, and maybe people like them, maybe they don't, but it's very hard to grow because no one's telling you, you have this really bad habit that you picked up the last 6 months. You got to work it out. And I think that when you're an intern, number one, you have a mentor who could just tell you the truth, like that drasha was boring, and that's okay. Like you have to hear that from somebody, or that point was offensive, or it just doesn't look like you're trying hard enough, or whatever the feedback might be. But also to learn how to really gauge your audience. You ask an intern, what do you think people thought of your drasha? And they'll say, oh, everyone at Kiddush said, nice job, kid. So I think I did great, 10 out of 10. The MS is, you know the difference from as a professional. How many emails did you get after Shabbos? How many people bought the book that you read, that you quoted from? How many people objected to your point because they see the world differently than you do? And they were listening to you carefully and they gave you a chance, but they said, no, I'm sorry, I don't agree with you about that. I mean, that means that people care about the subject and they're listening to you and they want to wait. People hate waiting for their rabbi after shul. There's just, on a good day, there's a lot of people who want to talk to you. And if the idea is, well, if I pass him on the street, I'll tell him that I thought that story was funny, is not the same thing as saying to your spouse, I got to talk to the rabbi, like, give me 5 minutes, and waiting to share feedback that they think is important, or a counterpoint that they think is important, or hakar satov, that you spoke about something that was important to them. I remember one year at Yisker talking about how hard it is to say Yisker for relatives in our family that disappointed us, and how painful it is to feel like every Yisker is about how much we loved our parents and grandparents and siblings and aunts and uncles, when sometimes we're saying Yisker for someone who we're still mad at. And I remember getting multiple phone calls from people. One person asked me to borrow the book that I quoted from, and I lent it to them, and I went to their house and dropped it off, and they just unloaded all of the pain that they'd experienced all these years because someone finally addressed it at Yisker, that how much they hate Yisker for that reason. So I know that drasha touched somebody. It's not the same as somebody patting you on the back and saying, good job, good joke. That's not real feedback. Or it is, that the drasha just wasn't there. You have to learn how to continue to grow, and you have to learn how to get real quality feedback to understand how good of a job you're doing.
That was super, super valuable. That was really helpful. Okay, to end on a light note, I'm going to ask you, this is a new feature that I decided to insert, your favorite sermon joke, your favorite joke that you like to use, or something that you've heard, or story, or...
I'll tell you my favorite. I mentioned before, I just tell some random jokes. I'll tell you two because they're different, if that's okay. Rabbi Berman was visiting with us at the Archekala, president of Yeshiva University, Rabbi Dr. Ari Berman. I mean, he told this incredible joke that I then repeated the next Shabbos in shul, and I said afterwards, going to Florida for 3 days just to get this joke was totally kedai. It's an amazing joke. In my opinion, it's an amazing joke. It's the story of a guy goes to a bar at the end of work every day, and he orders 3 shots. Maybe you've heard it before.
Oh, yeah.
And he orders three shots, and he does this every single day. So the bartender says to him, there's no reason to order 3 separate shots. I'll just give you a glass and a few cubes of ice and you could have a proper beverage. He goes, no. I have 2 brothers. Each of them lives in another part of the country. We miss each other very much. At the end of the day, each of us goes to a bar after work and we each have a shot, in honor of each of our brothers. 1, 2, 3. So I need them to be separate. After a while, the guy comes to the bar after work and he only orders 2 shots. So the bartender puts 2 and 2 together. There's something terrible must have happened. So he walks over to the person. He says, I'm so sorry for your loss. Did one of your brothers pass away? And he said, no, Baruch Hashem, my brothers are fine. I just quit drinking. So to me, it's just it's a punchline you don't see coming. It's a fantastic joke. It's easy to tell. I heard it from the president of the yeshiva himself, and I was able to convey that. And It was great. So sometimes you hear jokes like that, and you know they're just hilarious. Whatever you're going to do
Yeah.
with them, you'll do with them. I love that joke. I'll tell a personal story that I love to tell, but you can only tell it to your shul one time. But I've told it in different places. Um, when you live in Manhattan, like I did, and 'cause I like to tell my own story. So there's a whole doorman culture that you kind of have to get used to. And one of the elements of the doorman culture, especially in the Amazon era, is the doormen have to take all your little packages. Everything comes in its own gigantic box, even though it's only one toothbrush. And the doormen have so many packages to handle, they're very aggressive. So you come home at the end of the day, and the doorman says, Dave, I got 5 packages for you. And it doesn't matter if you're holding a baby or you have hot coffee in your hand or both. There's like sticking packages in your arms. My doorman stick my packages in the elevator with me as I go upstairs to try and get them out of the lobby as quickly as possible. And especially during the holiday season, because now there's a Christmas tree in the lobby and everything's, there's less space and more packages coming. They're very aggressive. My doorman in Manhattan, they knew me very well. We had a good relationship, and they knew that I don't take packages on Shabbos. So they're super aggressive with me 6 days a week. But Friday night to Saturday night, they just left me alone because they knew I was in my suit. They knew it was Shabbos. They left me alone. So the year that I told this story the first time, it actually happened that day. Um, Shabbos was December 25th. And um, I woke up Shabbos morning to go to shul, and I was the only person awake in the whole building because it was Christmas Day. And we all went to shul that day. And, the whole world is asleep that Shabbos morning except us, Shachris at 9 o'clock. And as I walk downstairs to the lobby, everything is quiet and perfect. And the lobby is decorated with lights, and there's snowflakes on the windows, and everything is clean and sparkly. And there's that Christmas tree. And beneath the Christmas tree, there are 4 boxes stacked perfectly, and all 4 of them say Dovid Zirkind on them. So that's the kind of and that was a drasha that I gave about the intersectionality of Jewish life and living in a Christian culture. Like that image of like walking into the lobby and all the boxes under the Christmas tree say David Zirkin. That was a real life experience that was easy to tell as a great opener to a drasha. I've told it many times.
Fantastic. Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I will put this together. Usually I'm back. I got a backlog. I got about 17 or 18 interviews to get through. But yeah, it's amazing. It's really, really valuable and helpful. And it was so interesting. So interesting to hear your perspective. So just send people to you, the shul, just the website,
Yeah, so some of our classes are available online and some of the recordings of the shiurim
yeah,
that we teach. I don't normally publish my drushos, so they're
yeah. I
not
haven't heard
available.
for any examples.
Yeah, it's too much work to, especially the drushes that aren't written. It happens a lot. I feel like I write these drushes. I deliver drushes that come out great, and then people say, "Can I have it? Can you send me a copy? I want to share with my cousin. I heard it was really good, but I wasn't in shul, and all I have is chicken scratch on an index card, and it's, I'm not going to have time on Monday to write for 2 hours to get it where I want it to be.
Yeah.
So I don't have that, but I do have some shiurim that I'm very proud of that are available on our website. And if anybody wants to check them out or be in touch, I would love to discuss it more.
Okay.